Hi all, let's have a look at the very exciting game from round 7 in the Gashimov Memorial. Vishy Anand was playing white against Michael Adams. So we have c4, the English opening, so played against Adams, an English player. e5, g3, and black here usually actually plays knight f6 or knight c6. These are popular, but also this has been played quite a bit, c6, so black is trying for a quick d5. White usually tries to tease this pawn forward. On d6, that's very passive, it's rarely played, so e4 is the usual response, and we have what looks to be kind of a reverse Hanakein's defense. White is provoking black to occupy the center and has various undermining moves later. For example, d3 could be handy after black tries to protect the e4 pawn. We have d5, and white immediately here plays c takes d5. Black's usual response is actually what was played, queen takes. You might think that's a bit odd, it doesn't maintain the pawn chain, but it's hyper modern. On c takes d5, this is a very nice position actually for white, for example like this, with prospects to get in this d3 move, attacking the pawn chain, and white ends up with a very pleasant position. So actually we have queen takes d5, and black is essentially saying, well, this is an aggressive pawn and it will give my pieces good scope and space. Isn't there a kind of space advantage if I can maintain my pawn? We see also, of course, an immediate attack on the knight. The knight retreats, knight f6, reinforcing that advanced pawn, knight c3, and the queen actually plays to h5 here. And yes, this is a well-trodden position, or rather, it was a well-trodden position before knight c3. Funny enough, knight c3, although it seems entirely natural, you may not believe this, but actually bishop g2 is 82 games in live book and knight c3 is only 4. So it's a kind of little novelty not actually, having the urgency to castle kingside with bishop g2. An example game continuation with bishop g2 like this. Now sealing h3, queen going back to g6. This sort of thing has happened quite a bit before. There's quite a few games even. Well, there's a few games even here. But yeah, this is a slight little wrinkle here. Knight c3. We have queen h5, and yeah, if something like bishop g2, maybe in the future bishop h3 is useful. We see white delaying bishop g2, knight e3. And we're kind of completely out of book here, believe it or not, at move 8. It's not really a usual typical position. Adams plays bishop c5. Queen c2 seems entirely logical. White is delayed fianchettoing his bishop, clearly. And he's just attacking this advanced pawn. Now black here plays what seems to be quite sensible from a structural perspective, in some respects. Black committed to bishop takes e3. And there's two ways, of course, to take this. And this he chooses the f pawn. So maybe in the future this f file could be quite handy. We see now, of course, e4's been attacked, and how to defend this. Queen g6, bishop g2, and it carries on a bit like that. But we actually have the protection move queen e5 instead, which means bishop f5 to g6 might be handy, not occupying the g6 square necessarily with the queen to protect this pawn. So it seems to be a reinforced pawn, but white does have this bishop pair. But on the other hand, what will be the scope of this bishop? Will it come out later, say on this diagonal? Let's see what happened. Bishop g2, black defends this pawn, now white castles, and black castles. And here, there's already a forcing move which needs to be checked every turn in this position. In that white should be checking just the theoretical soundness of rook takes f5 even here. White played b3. Rook takes f5 here doesn't seem to do too much. It wins one pawn for the exchange. But say knight bd7 here, black can put pressure now on e4, and this would seem not too bad for black. The exchange up without any structural damage, and asking for the queen exchange. That's okay for black. So yeah, it doesn't seem to work out too well here. Rook takes f5. We have b3, as though, yeah, bishop b2 to attack the queen is coming up. Knight bd7. And we have bishop b2 now. So does this make a difference for things? Queen e6. Now queen e6 might be a little bit on the dodgy side here. There was a move available for black. I believe it was possible to ignore the seemingly scary attack on the queen by retreating the bishop here to g6. This position, if say knight takes e4 hitting the queen, black could reply with bishop takes e4. And I think this is okay for black. This is not good for white to do that there. So bishop g6 seems a plausible move in this position. On, say, rook takes f6, knight takes f6, knight takes e4, again, black has the resource bishop takes e4 counter-attacking the queen. So yeah, it seems as though this might be a slight mistake, what was played here, queen e6, because now that previous forcing move, which you'd always check, when circumstances change, has a spicy little difference now. It is actually played in this position. So how powerful is this exchange sacrifice? Well, we see now after queen takes f5, knight takes e4 now threatens actually knight takes f6 check, winning the queen with queen takes f5. The queen is actually basically attacked. And yeah, black doesn't really want to play knight takes e4 if it can help it here. There seems to be some significant pressure. Black actually dropped the queen back for a moment, and we have the pressure building up anyway with rook f1. So we've got 1, 2, 3 all on f6, and it is pretty dangerous here. If black now plays knight takes e4, he didn't do this, Mike Adams played rook f8, but if he plays knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and white's got nice control and the bishop pair of that f5 square, nice control of f5, and this is actually really dangerous for h7. For example, queen here, rook f5, queen h6, rook f4, threatening rook h4, and it forces horrible concessions and contortions here, which can only benefit the bishop pair. For example, g5 like this, and white's dominating the position even though the exchange down for a pawn. It's a very dominating position. Sorry, this position here it's in white's favour. So yes, it seems already quite dangerous in this position to consider playing knight takes e4. There seems to be a nice rook lift, and let's just check that out just once more here. If queen h6, trying to avoid any tempo gains, this is still pretty good. For rook f4, for rook h4, it's still pretty dangerous, and horrible things could result. So basically, after rook f1, we have rook fe8. Black is conceding with this move some permanent structural damage. And we've seen another exchange sacrifice recently on the channel, a Nakamura exchange sacrifice in the Dragon, which actually also netted permanent structural damage. That's an interesting feature of an exchange sacrifice, if you can damage the opponent's pawn structure. And you might only have a pawn for it, or not even a pawn sometimes, but here there's permanent structural damage inflicted with bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, knight takes f6 check. So even though the queen's attacked, unfortunately it's check, g takes. So is this enough compensation for the exchange sacrifice? Is it really enough? We see now e4, and white's marking out some light squares here and establishing a kind of dominance in the centre. So where black was previously having that advanced pawn, it's replaced by white's pawn. White has undermined the centre and is occupying it. The exchange down. Rook ad8, rook f4, queen h5, attacking e2. That's protected with d3. Queen e5. And we have now white's bishop playing a more active role with bishop h3, as though the bishop might be wanting to go to f5 later. King g7, king g2, away from dark squares. h5, and we have rook f5 now. So Adams with h5 is provoking white to consider taking this pawn. Is he getting dangerous compensation? Let's see, queen d4. Well, white actually decides it's okay to take this pawn and risk, say, rook h8. But that's not the idea, actually. There's a more subtle idea here. Rook takes h5 was played, and the more subtle idea was actually queen e3. And yes, the idea of queen e3 is bearing down on white's king side rather uncomfortably. The queen is difficult to evict here with the sole queen without any support from that dark square. It's a powerful centralized queen in some respects, and there's an immediate threat of rook takes e4 crashing down with rook d2. To give you a token move to show that here, if a3, just as a token move, rook takes, this is really getting to white's king. So white has to protect against this, and he plays actually the move rook h4, protecting e4. We have rook e5, and you might think, well, is black's pawns sack a bit dodgy there, because now it's like 2 pawns for the exchange. Things are actually getting worse now, and black still has these double pawns. So it's 2 pawns for the exchange. Rook f4. We have rook c5, but isn't this dangerous? Well, the thing is, white doesn't give black time. White plays queen b2 here, hitting f6. There's no time to go for the king here, without black's king getting in big trouble. And there's a loose rook here as well. So rook d6, rook f1 preventing rook c1, and also bishop f5 might be handy. So white seems to be keeping control of his h5 pawn gain, but for the foreseeable future it seems a long way away from actually using these pawns. a5, bishop f5, okay, at least the h pawn is unblocked, and now actually after b5 it's pushed. Is this useful? Rook d8. Well, now we have a3, as though b4 might be handy. That would fix down black's pawn structure. Black stops that with b4 himself. A takes. But actually now there is here a focal point on the f6 pawn placed with the move bishop e6. And you'll notice that when black had played b4, he's weakened actually the c4 square. So this is actually quite nifty, threatening queen takes f6 check. If we look at the timing of that, because this needs to be parried, waiting for that b4 is very nifty here, because now rook c3, bishop c4 is possible. So this reflects a big improvement surely for the bishop, eyeing down on f7, but it's more active there than where it was on this diagonal. If we just take a moment to just reconsider that, hold on a sec. White had this tactic here, but it didn't really perhaps do anything too significantly. In this position, bishop e6, what would black do? I think probably just rook e5 is sufficient to evict that bishop here. I don't think there's any major clever trick here. The bishop, it hasn't got a retreat in this position, so I think that should be sufficient, for example, to shield f6 here. But what has happened with this a3 was a slight rupture of black on that c4 square. So now bishop coming after taking, bishop coming here is actually much more useful. So we see that cheeky reorganizing of the bishop there. What does this actually mean? The bishop though on c4 eyeing f7, unless you can break through to f7, that won't mean too much, will it? Rook a8, rook f5 now is played, and there's an immediate intention with rook f5 of e5, it seems, to try and break through to that f7. So the bishop is already letting itself show its presence with this e5. Its presence is felt. Rook a7 protecting f7. Now rook f3 kicking the queen away from that central square. Queen c5. Queen d2 now, and this looks very interesting for queen f4 and rook f5 with rook h5 to get onto h6 potentially. So these are dangerous possibilities. We have Queen D6 now. So White actually now plays Queen E3 here, hitting that rook. There was also another idea though in this position. Rook F5 was quite dangerous, with Rook H5 as an idea to get onto H6. But Queen E3, okay, hitting the rook. The rook moves and protects F5, so that stops that being possible. That's why it might have been a slight inaccuracy to hit the rook here. Maybe Rook F5 is interesting, just with the idea, you know, to stop any Rook A5 from black, and then we've got Rook H5 and then Queen H6. So it's a, you know, it's a scary position for black. So Rook A5 trying to hold on, stopping Rook F5, Rook F2. So for the moment, black's position seems stable enough, so it needs to be disrupted. Rook C2, and in fact, here's the disruption coming up. G4, and now White is playing for G5. These two pawns are dangerous, trying to break through to F7. And how can black actually stop this? We have Queen D7, it doesn't really help things. Queen G3, reinforcing the idea that G5 is coming up. This is a very aggressive bishop with this rook on the F file, looking at that F7 pawn. Rook C5, and here is the breakthrough move. Very difficult for black to do anything about it. G5. This is not very pleasant at all. If black tries to avoid stripping down the G file with F5, you might think this is a plausible defense, but here things can get very nasty. H5, and White has G6 on the cards then. And for example, I mean, let's throw in a token move just to show this. This is very, very dangerous. And here there might even be a move like H6 coming up with G7 in the right circumstance. So I think these two are protected pass pawns. It can't really be tolerated. This defense doesn't look too appealing with F5. Instead, Michael Adams plays F takes, and he's accepting the loss of a queen here for rook and bishop. So is it good enough for the queen versus the two rooks? Well, Vishy thought it was. He did take on F7. So we have a queen versus two rook scenario. And now we have check here. Okay, so what's really going on here? Well, we have now, after H5, a very dangerous position. We've got things potentially, these running pawns in the centre. The queen is potentially finding cooperation with the pawn. Maybe after certain checks, maybe like to F7, the pawn will be dangerous. So we have Rook A5 played, King F2, which frees up the queen more, protecting E2 with the king. Rook B2, and this is actually a loose rook, it probably doesn't help matters, but it's already a very difficult position. Now tactically, White delivers a very strong move here. Can you see, if I give you 5 seconds, based on the loose rook? Okay, H6 check. Yes, if king takes, then queen F6 check picks up the rook. So we have king G6, but now another strong move. Can you guess? If I give you 5 seconds. Okay, H7. Yes. First thing to queen. It's black actually resigned here. If taking the queen checking here is really dangerous, and then here we'll pick up the rook. Alternatively, let's have a look at this position again. King H8, Queen F6, picking up the rook. So yeah, this position here with Queen F7 check is picking up that rook. Yes, it was an interesting exchange sacrifice from early on this game, and it shows, you know, great dynamic play actually from Vishy Anand. Actually throughout the tournament, as it turned out. So some brilliant games played by Vishy Anand in the tournament, which I think deserve to be looked at. Even once the tournament ends, you know, it's some brilliant games have been played in the Gashimov Memorial. And I believe this is one of the more exciting ones with the exchange sacrifice. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.